Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics Election 2020 Fall Discussion Group. Today, we're kicking off the 7-part series, Politics, Pandemic, and Protests. And for the next several weeks, we're going to be gathering virtually on Wednesday afternoons to take a deep dive into this year's presidential campaign and the larger political landscape. We have a lot to talk about. I'm Colleen McCain Nelson, and I'll be joining you on this political adventure. I'm a fellow this fall at the Dole Institute, and I'm also vice president and editorial page editor at the Kansas City Star. Before coming back home to Kansas, I was a White House correspondent and a political reporter for the Wall Street Journal. So suffice it to say, I'm kind of a political junkie, and I feel fortunate that I get to come along for the ride on this journey. During the next several weeks, this discussion series is going to delve into the issues that are driving this campaign, including COVID-19, the economy, and racial unrest. We're going to explore how Joe Biden stumbled in the early Democratic primaries and then defied his doubters and won the nomination. We're going to talk about the war of disinformation in the 2020 election, and we'll also talk about whether endorsements matter anymore. And once every vote is counted in November, we'll reconvene to answer the question, what just happened? So today we're going to start with an overview of the state of the presidential race after a tumultuous and highly unpredictable spring and summer. And even just the last few days have been filled with plot twists that we didn't see coming. We'll look at issues that are resonating with voters, which states will matter in this election, and what the next 41 days will hold. Before I introduce you to our esteemed guests, I do want to note that we plan to make this an interactive conversation. So later in the discussion, we'll leave some time for our audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please type it in the YouTube chat box on your screen. And if you could hold questions until later in the program, I'll let you know when we're ready to have you start typing. And I want everyone to remember that the Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. So please phrase your questions with this in mind. Questions that are distracting, disrespectful, or attempt to dominate the chat will be deleted and the user will be removed. I won't even get to see those questions, so please don't do that. Finally, before we move on to the program, I want to offer a word of thanks to Newman's own foundation, which is sponsoring this series. Okay, it's go time. So let's dive in. I'm really thrilled to introduce you to today's guests. Our panelists, Alan Katz and Kevin Yoder, come from both sides of the political aisle. I'm not playing favorites here, but I'm going to start by introducing Kevin Yoder because he's a Jayhawk. Kevin Yoder is a 5th-generation Kansan who represented Kansas's 3rd congressional district for 4 terms from 2011 to 2019. During his tenure in Congress, he served on the House Appropriations Committee, where he chaired both the Homeland Security and the Legislative Branch subcommittees. His service in Congress was marked by his support for policies that helped grow the economy and build opportunity for all Americans. He regularly crossed the aisle working with members of both parties to push for key initiatives, including historic expansion of medical research funding at the National Institutes of Health and new investments in early childhood education programs like Head Start. Prior to serving in Congress, Kevin was elected 4 times to the Kansas State Legislature, representing Overland Park and Leawood, and he served as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Kevin is a University of Kansas graduate, and fun fact, he was elected student body president at KU. Welcome, Kevin. Allan J. Katz served as Ambassador of the United States of America to the Republic of Portugal during the Obama administration from March 2010 until March 2013. Upon his return to private life, Ambassador Katz joined University of Missouri, Kansas City as a distinguished professor, where he served from 2013 until 2019. In 2019, he joined the faculty of William Jewell College as distinguished professor in residence. Additionally, in 2014, he founded and remains CEO and chairman of an NGO, American Public Square, which brings together like-minded people to engage in civil fact-based dialogue about polarizing issues, much like we're doing today. A lawyer by background, Ambassador Katz was the national director of the public policy practice group at the firm of Ackerman Centerfit from 2004 to 2010. Before that, he founded and was managing partner of Katz, Cutter, Alderman, and Bryant, PA in Tallahassee, Florida. He previously worked on Capitol Hill, and in Florida, he served as Assistant Insurance Commissioner and as a City of Tallahassee Commissioner. Now he divides his time between Kansas City and Portugal, which seems like a really good arrangement. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the race to the White House. We have a lot to cover, but let's just start with a 30,000-foot view of the presidential campaign. It feels like every day is a tornado of news, accusations, counterpunches, and revelations. Voters are exhausted just trying to keep up. With 41 days left, how would you assess each candidate's position in the race? What issues do you think President Trump should be running on, and what argument do you think Joe Biden should be making? Allan, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you, Colleen. And it's nice. I should also tell all our viewers that both you and Kevin serve on the board of American Public Square. So it's nice, sort of like old home week. But let me address your question. I've thought for a long time that President Trump was going to lose this election, long before we knew who the nominee was going to be, primarily because I believe this election would come down to a referendum on President Trump, because his personality would not allow it to be anything but that. And I think that his job rating has consistently been in the high 30s, low 40s, occasionally inches up to the mid 40s. But it's very, very difficult to win an election when you're there. I think the other part, I think the one opportunity he had to change that was oddly enough with COVID. And I think that had he demonstrated a certain type of leadership that would have been more appealing to more people, he could have actually begun to turn that around. But he chose to govern the way he chooses to govern. And it's what he is clearly comfortable doing. It's what he continues to do, into which he has a very strong base of support that supports what he's done. What I don't believe is that base of support is going to be enough to win this election, because I think that essentially people are tired. They are worn out by the drama that his presence creates. It was almost like there was a desire for a disruptor back in 2016. We've had the disruptor. I think people are tired of all this disruption. And I suspect that what will happen is that he will lose the election, and probably lose it by, as I told someone the other day, I believe there's a greater chance he will lose by a substantial margin than he will win.
Kevin, how do you assess the race right now? What do you think the president should be running on, and how would you assess Joe Biden's performance?
Well, I think what's been remarkable about this election has been the how static the numbers have been. And to my friend Allan's point about where Trump's approval rating has been, it's really been that way for his entire presidency. And in modern politics, with the polling we have, we've really never seen a president stay within a 3 or 4 or 5 point margin of approval rating. There have been ups and downs, of course. Presidents in the late 20th century, George H.W. Bush at 80% and then loses the election. And so there's been a lot of volatility. This president's really, in spite of impeachment, which actually happened earlier this year, many of us have kind of already, it seems years ago, but that was just earlier this year before COVID. I mean, there's been impeachment, there's been COVID, there's been so many things that this president has been engaged in that might damage another president's approval ratings significantly. It's been pretty static. It's not been great. It's not been awful. It's just been kind of right where it's been. Obviously, I think his numbers should be better than they are. I think that had he made some different choices, particularly stylistically, tactically, the way he has talked about certain individuals has, I think, diminished people that may even like his policies, like the free market economics, the foreign policy, the tax policy, but just don't like the style. And so I think that's been a challenge that I don't think everyone kept saying, well, once he becomes in office, it'll be different. And that's obviously been the same, but it also appeals to people in ways that other presidents haven't appealed before. You see the Trump boat rallies and the parades, and the enthusiasm is somewhat unique. Maybe President Obama had that in 2008, but there's only certain periods where you have somebody who generates that sort of enthusiasm amongst the base. So I think some of the strengths, if I were the president, I would certainly focus on, and I don't know if he'll get, fair credit for, but on foreign policy, I think the recent peace negotiation with the UAE and Israel was historic, and probably no matter what is remembered from this presidency, that'll be something that sticks out as a real positive. One of the things that the president said he would do was not engage us in additional war. And we've gone a long time now without entangling ourselves in a new war. And I think it's one of the longest stretches we've been without getting engaged in some way in an armed conflict. And he's been able to really bring that back. And so I think, for foreign policy folks, which these aren't necessarily traditional, the Republican Party is more hawkish on the Dove side for folks who want a foreign policy. It's a little bit less engaged around the world and doesn't put troops in harm's way. He's delivered on that, and I think delivered on some of the peace stuff. The economy was a high mark, of course, before COVID. That was something that the president was really touting, and of course that has changed for him, and that's been probably one of the most recent weaknesses that might ultimately doom his election. On the flip side, obviously Joe Biden's case is that he's the safe, sturdy option. That if you don't like President Trump, you don't even have to like his policies. You don't have to like Joe Biden's policies. Their argument is it's just a safe place to land. And I think the challenge with that is that there's a lot of concerns about the president's engagement and strength. He's not out campaigning every day, 78 years old. And I do think that worries some folks that, at the end of his first term, he'd be in, 82, and certainly no reason to have age discrimination here. He's certainly an 82-year-old can certainly be very highly functional and engaged, but I think there's some concerns about how sharp he is at this point and how effective he might be as a president. And there's a belief that sort of the Democrats are doing everything they can to protect him from that. And everybody's, of course, interested in the debates to see if how each of them hold up. And a lot of times with debates, we get excited for them. They don't really change the race. This may be a case where that does. We don't know, but we'll see if that's a game-changing moment. I mean, I think right now the president, if our election were today, I don't think he would win. But I think it's probably closer than the national polls indicate, because when you get into state-by-state polls, there's polling today, I think from ABC, Washington Post, that has a margin of error in Arizona, a margin of error in Florida. These are races where he's been down. And so if you start thinking you win Arizona, you win Florida, and then it comes down to where you are on the Rust Belt and what do blue-collar workers in Wisconsin and Michigan end up doing in Pennsylvania. And those are voters he's done really well with. So I think there's a lot for the Trump campaign to still believe in, but there's certainly, I think, on they're trying to climb back in right now, but there's still some time. And of course, the Supreme Court vacancy, and I'm sure you'll probably ask about that, is factoring into this as well at this point now.
Let me, if I can, Charlie, just jump in a couple quick things here. First of all, I agree with a lot of what Kevin said. Not all of, wouldn't give the president the credit that he gives him for certain policies, probably because I disagree with him. But I think on the foreign policy side, where part of his problem has been is that his disparaging of NATO and our traditional allies have not made that situation any better in certain ways. But I do believe that, and which goes back to what I said earlier, I believe that there are so few undecided voters left that it's hard to imagine they're going to make the difference, certainly not in the macro sense. Now, they could, a different slice in Florida, a different slice in Arizona, Wisconsin, whatever. But I think that you've got probably 40 to 45% of Americans who would vote for Donald Trump if he went out with a machine gun tomorrow and shot people. And you've got probably 50% of Americans who wouldn't vote for Donald Trump tomorrow if he cured cancer. So what you really have is, so what's left is very, very little. And I think that a traditional campaign where issues here and there really make a big difference, I don't see that happening here. The Supreme Court thing, which we can talk about in a minute, I think has helped consolidate the base on the right. Although one argument is that if he gets this justice approved before the election, those people who find Trump to be unacceptable personally, they got what they want ideologically. Now they can get rid of Trump. On the left, I think what you're going to see is that if there was any waning of support for Biden on the left, because he wasn't ideologically aligned with them, this particular situation with the court, I think is going to drive turnout even more.
I think that's a really good point about the really small number of undecided voters in this race. And Kevin, I thought it was interesting what you said about how static this race has been. One of my former colleagues at the Wall Street Journal tweeted earlier this week, he noted that when the Wall Street Journal NBC poll came out in January, Biden was ahead by 8 points. Since then, the whole world has turned upside down. There's been impeachment, there's been COVID, there's been Black Lives Matter protests. We've had, we've had an economic recession. We've had so many things happen. And here we are 8-9 months later, and the latest Wall Street Journal NBC poll came out on Sunday, and Biden was up by 8 points. And I mean, completely static despite the whole world turning upside down. And so, Kevin, I'm interested in whether you think there's anything that could move the needle in the next 41 days. What might that be, or is everyone just locked down where they are?
Well, I think part of it is, with polling, of course, is who you're polling. I'm not casting aspersions on the pollsters by any means. I've done a lot of polling over my years, and so has Alan. I'm sure you have as well, Colleen. So, I believe in certainly science and the strategies, but I would say it can't always accurately capture who's going to come out to vote, right? And it's hard to sometimes capture that enthusiasm. And I think one thing to your question, Colleen, that could be potential here is as Alan mentioned, the base of Trump voters becoming very enthusiastic about the Supreme Court fight, and this spilling over into the debate might create enthusiasm growth a little bit on the Trump side for folks that thought, I can't go back and vote for him again, but I could never vote for a Democrat, so I'm just not going to stay up. They might go, okay, this reminds me of why we got to stick with the president. That was one of his grand bargains he made from the beginning with certain voting blocks in the Republican Party, that he will deliver on judges. And so to have the ultimate, judge vacancy 6 weeks before the election might be a game-changing moment, in that I don't think necessarily it's going to move someone from one column to the other very much, to Alan's point about lots of undecided, but it could drive a few people out to vote who weren't planning on voting, and maybe decided they weren't that enthused about Trump to do it. So I think there's a little bit of factor there. The other thing I'll say on the national polling is that we learned very well in 2016 that the national polling is not really what we need to watch here, right? It's what we talk about, it's what we're talking about now, it's what's on the news, it's what everybody's like, well, Trump's down. What's really important is to count the Electoral College and to go state by state, which apparently the Clinton campaign didn't do as much in 2016, the Trump campaign did. And you're looking at where are the state by state polls in those key states, and of course, mention Arizona, mention Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The Trump team's still try to make a play for Minnesota. Within striking distance there. So yes and no. Is there an 8-point shift that I think is going to happen between now and the election if those polls are right? I don't. Is there a 2 or 3 point shift in which is in the margin of error anyway in certain states that might make the difference in the Electoral College? That's still certainly potential, and I think that's what the Trump team is spending their time.
If I can, I think there are two important points here. The first one is that this is the first time in that I can think of in historic memory where a presidential campaign has sort of openly said, well, we don't care about winning the popular vote. Whether or not they, again, we know how we elect presidents, but somewhere in this whole notion of what is the role of a president is to get more votes than their opponent. And basically the Trump campaign sort of gave up on that about 2 or 3 months ago. I think the second thing on the swing states, if you look at the Electoral College, going into 2016, we Democrats thought we had the advantage. We really did. And the reason is because we believed the country was that the portion of white voters in each election was going down. And the Republicans were losing every other demographic other than white voters. And so therefore, as the percentage of the whole white voters declined, and what happened, of course, in 2016 was there was a much greater turnout among white, particularly rural white voters than there were among urban minorities. And that was the reason that Trump was able to thread the needle through the states that he was. As far as looking at the Electoral College for 2020, I think what happens is this. Remember, President Trump won every swing state. And the reality is that he can win Florida and he can win North Carolina, which he did last time. And he can win Arizona, which he did last time. He can win Georgia and Texas. But what he can't lose is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and win the election. And in all three of those three states, he is behind, in a couple of them fairly substantially. And as Kevin points out, it's a toss-up in Florida. It's always a toss-up in Florida, having lived there a long time. So, I didn't believe the polls when Biden is up. I don't believe any of the polls. I think it's going to be within a point, one way or the other. Arizona, frankly, I think is clearly trending away from the Republicans. Whether this is their last time they win an election there or not for the president, we'll see. Georgia's closer than anyone thought it would ever be. The fact that the Trump campaign is now starting to spend money in Texas is not a great sign. Iowa and Ohio are within a point. All of those states Trump won last time. Now, the other side of that is that, which Kevin will point out if I don't do it first, most of the time, the swing states, they don't split, half go to one, half go to the other. Usually most of them go one way or most of them go the other. The difference with President Trump's campaign in 2016 was not only did he win every swing state, he won several of them by the tiniest of margins. And even though I know they like to play in Minnesota this year, and they'd like to play in New Hampshire this year, the latest poll in Minnesota has him down by 11, which doesn't mean he can't come back, but it's not a good place to be. And I think that there's very little that the Trump campaign can pick up that's due. And therefore, I think that it's a huge problem for them. And particularly in all those states, almost all of them, you have very competitive Senate races going on as well.
Kevin, I'd like to talk a little bit about COVID and how it's affected this race before we get to the Supreme Court, which I'm very eager to dive into as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about the coronavirus, which has changed so many things about this race, from the national conventions to the way candidates campaign. Obviously, we crossed a really sad mark these last couple of days with 200,000 Americans having lost their lives. But some people are kind of starting to ask the question of whether we've just kind of become a nerd to this. And we actually saw one of President Trump's allies say the other day that coronavirus was now nothing but background noise for voters. I'm interested, Kevin, in how you think voters are processing the pandemic as they consider this election. Do you think they're basing their votes on how the president handled this public health crisis, or is that not a decision point for people at this point?
I think depending on what you thought about the president prior to the pandemic affects how you think about the president during the pandemic. And so I don't know that there's a lot of voters, to Allan's sort of general point here, that in my point about it, this race being static for years, I don't think there's a lot of voters who decided that they were going to change their opinion of the president based on this. I think you have a lot of voters who are in the president's camp who are pretty cynical about the public health response on this and believe that some of the restrictions are overbearing and have missed the basic fundamentals of freedom and life and liberty that have been taken away, and are pretty frustrated with the response. And there are others who feel very strongly that the government hasn't reacted strongly and swiftly enough. I certainly know where mainstream views are on that. I know where the media's views are on that. I know where probably a lot of suburban voters in my former district are on those questions. I know where a lot of rural voters are on it, right? And we remain divided. Our opinions about COVID, I can probably tell you what your opinion is by asking who you voted for in the last presidential election, right? And so we can talk about Republicans and Democrats, but it tends to be who you voted for. And I've asked these questions before, even to calling newspapers and stuff, saying like, well, how many Republicans are on the press team? And they'll say, well, we have some. I'm like, how many voted for Trump? Well, maybe none of them, right? So the question is like, are you a Trump voter? Are you a non-Trump voter? That to me, it's really not party affiliation based. It's more presidential based. And I know Allan and I have certainly very strong opinions about how this has all been handled. And but I don't know how relevant it is to this conversation, but I would just say for your question that I think it informs voters on how they believe, but I think it probably about how they believe about the candidates, but I think it probably is already in line with what they thought about them.
Right. And let me, first of all, I agree with Kevin on the notion that basically if you liked President Trump before COVID, you think he's done a heck of a good job. And if you didn't like him, you think he's done a terrible job. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest, that's why I said I thought this could have shifted things. I think if had Trump done a better job, what I would describe as a better job, he had an opportunity to get some of those,
convert some folks.
But what happened is that he chose instead to treat this sort of as a public relations problem, and basically has chosen to attack people who have a different point of view than he does. And I think, unlike a lot of other things that the president attacked in the past, first of all, most voters, they don't care. I mean, there are those of us who pay attention to politics and attention to government, but a lot of people, they're living their lives and they're getting about their lives. And it's just a lot of static, it's a lot of noise. As Kevin said, okay, I normally vote Republican, I normally vote Democratic. Most of the stuff doesn't really move us from one side to the other. COVID was different because COVID suddenly affected everybody's life. Not only just because of the fact that people got sick, We may have even known someone who got sick and died. But suddenly all these restrictions came in, and the sort of the uncertainty that came coming out of government, where basically when you're faced with a national catastrophe, I mean, after 9/11, we had a pretty firm idea that came from the federal government of what was going to happen next. We didn't have this here. We had some of this and we had some of that. And while a lot of the stuff that was political noise in the past people could dismiss, they couldn't dismiss this. Because every day the question was, my kid can't go to school now. I can't go out. So suddenly what I call the general incompetence and of the Trump administration became much more obvious to many more people who might have been willing at some point to rally around the president had he been capable of giving a rallying cry that encompassed most Americans. But instead, he chose to do what he's always done. And frankly, none of us should be surprised, because he's a 74-year-old man and he's lived life the way he's lived it, and which, by the way, doesn't make him that much younger than Joe Biden, who's only 77. But in any event, but the larger point here is that he treated this like he treated everything else. And I think in this case, too many people were affected by COVID for it not to stick politically.
I wanted to touch on an ancillary to this, because I think regardless of who you support, there's no question that we've seen politics and public health get all mixed up during these last several months. We've had a pandemic collide with a presidential campaign. And as that's played out in real time, you see each party kind of picking their own facts. The CDC is putting out guidance and then retracting it. People are raising questions about whether they can trust the government, whether they can trust the CDC, whether they can trust science. And Allan, I'm interested in what you think the consequences of that are, and whether there's any way for us to get back to a place where we can trust the government, trust the CDC, and kind of agree on a common set of facts.
Well, I think what we've got is that first of all, let me just make a quick political point here to understand. I think what the Democrats have done with this judicial vacancy is very, very cleverly tied it to healthcare. And I think that if the debate is around healthcare, which is the big issue in the suburbs, that's very, very helpful for the Democrats. But to get back to your larger point, I'm very, very concerned about the corrosive effect that the Trump administration has had, not just on how we're viewed around the world, but in terms of whether or not America can be relied upon. But which is a huge problem, not just because a new president can come in and be more normal, but the point is the rest of the world suddenly found out that they're one election away from America being unreliable. And that was an unthinkable thought in the past. As far as our domestic institutions are concerned, virtually all of them have become rattled. And the fact is, the point is this: it's not like some of them didn't need to be shaken up, because some of them probably do. And traditionally, we need that. The problem was it was this overt cynicism that sort of presented itself as the president versus whoever it was that he didn't like at the moment or was opposing him at the moment, and that you could sort of undermine them with the most just awful ways. It's one thing to sort of say, I disagree with you, I have a different policy, we're going to carry it out this way. But when you just basically, when you set policy and denigrate people by tweet, and you're president of the United States, that undermines the whole framework that we have. And I'm not, whatever problems we've got, I'm not sure the whole framework needs to be undermined. And I think that the long-term effect of this is going to be very, very negative.
Kevin, how do you view that? Can we get back to a place where we can agree on some facts and trust our institutions?
Well, I think we were divided in politics long before Donald Trump came along. And in many cases, he was the answer some people were looking for because of their anger and frustration with politicians in both political parties. I mean, he runs as an apolitical candidate. He aligns with Republicans. He probably could have made he was a Democrat before that. He could have taken that lane. And I think it really is less about standard partisanship or ideology and more about Americans' general frustration that, Washington, D.C. and the establishment has lost its way, and the bureaucracy is too bloated, and they don't take care of the people they're set out to take care of, and they look out for themselves and not American citizens. And I still think that's a very real feeling in this country, even with the president's disruptive style in engagement there. And some could point to that some of those things could be even less have people have less confidence in some of those institutions than they did before, right? So we've been a long time in this country, I believe, in sort of tearing down institutions, and this belief that, look, whether it's our government or whatever it may be, that we've got to start tear these things down. I've always been one for trying to be pragmatic and try to fix these things, and so it's not my style, right? And I think it's abrasive to a number of folks' style, but I think for some people, it's the answer that they have been looking for, someone who hears them. I can't tell you the amount of people when I was in office that would tell me that President Trump is the first politician in their entire life that actually they feel like understands them and hears them and pays attention to what they care about. And the rest of the country on the coasts and other areas are rolling their eyes like, what a bunch of hayseeds, rather than maybe say, hey, wait a second, these are real people that felt that they weren't being listened to, that they didn't have a voice in politics, they didn't have a voice in their own country, and were being left behind, and now they feel like they have a voice. So one of the things I think it's always helpful for folks to do in politics is to respect the position that another person's taking, that it has merit and it deserves a seat at the table. So if you're someone who's very pro-choice, you sit at the table, and someone who's very pro-life, they represent a lot of voices that deserve a seat at the table, and vice versa. And so I think one of the challenges we've gotten at, and I think this is going to continue no matter who's elected in November, and this is one of the things I've mentioned before, but I just liked the guy who's Howard Schultz, who's running for president at one point, the Starbucks CEO. Yeah, he was running as independent, and he said one day why he was running as an independent, not a partisan, is because American politics is engaged in an endless series of revenge politics. You did this, so we're going to do that, and you did this, so we're going to do that. Like Barack Obama, to Alan's point about Trump not being trusted around the world, Barack Obama betrayed, what we thought was our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel, and signed a deal with Iran. So Republicans in Congress, a lot of Americans thought that was a bad deal. We thought that was mean we were going back on our word. President Obama drew a line in the sand and said, if Syria does this, I'm going to go in. Red line, doesn't go do it. And so we often had that same, Alan, I think, stole that talking point from me, which was our president. We just used it from 08 to 16. Our president has lost confidence and he's turned his back on our allies. So I think all these things continue, and it's always like, well, you guys did this and you guys did this, in this endless series of things. And I think, to segue into the court question, I think where this is really going to rear its head is that Democrats are essentially saying right now that if Republicans confirm the justice, that no one's seen who it is. I mean, maybe someone Democrats like. I mean, we've become so cynical, we can't even at least get the name out before trashing them. I mean, opposition research is starting and we don't even know who the person is yet. But that means that the Democrats will then go put 4 justices on the court. We'll just pack the court. I heard some Republicans say then we'll put 20 on, or Democrats say then we'll put 50 on, and then someone put 100 on, and we'll have 5,000 justices, and what have we solved? And so I wish, to your general point here, Colleen, that we had in both political parties, adults in the room who could manage all of this, whether it's in Congress or in the White House, all together. And I think that's one of the reasons Trump has appeal, is because people are like, you know what, that guy's different, and he's willing to, go against all of them. And I give him my support because I think that's where a lot of that energy comes from.
I agree with Kevin in terms of Trump's appeal, and believed it when he was elected, that there were people who had been left behind, who had been ignored for too long, and basically really by both parties, which is why Trump won the nomination in the first place, and the Republican Party, because Republicans for years have been sort of saying, elect us and we're going to go do all these things. They get elected and nothing would happen except to come back and sort of say, well, if you give us some more people, then we'll do some things. And the Democrats said, oh, we're going to take care of you. And they didn't do anything for them either. So Trump was sort of like, he captured it. Now, again, we have to recognize that his election in 2016 required the equivalent of pulling 3 cards to an inside straight. It wasn't like something that would have, that is likely to sort of occur again. I think, though, that what we have, and we really, to me, the issue of trying to get people to sit down is sort of what we do at American Public Square anyway. It's sort of our concept. But the notion really is that when you stop questioning someone else's motives, then you can really have a conversation. If I decide that the only reason Kevin is for something is because he thinks it's better for the Republicans, or I do something he thinks only better for the Democrats, then basically it's going to be very difficult for us ever to do this. I mean, it's like anyone who sits down at the table who thinks that they're going to convince people with whom they disagree to come to their point of view shouldn't be at the table. You should be at the table sort of saying, I have a point of view, it's different than yours. We need to see what we can agree on so that we can make some progress. We've lost that in American politics, and we've lost it in a way that really is going to require someone who can really sort of make people believe that they're really willing to listen again. And I will say this too. I think that I think Barack Obama actually believed that he could get the Republicans to sit down with him. And from the very beginning, the decision was made that that wasn't going to happen. I think that I really think that that Joe Biden is someone who should not be viewed as a threatening kind of individual. He's been around for a long time. He's 77 years old. He is not sort of looking for some, grander thing. And I said, what I would hope is that the Republican Party, that there's enough left of it that's not going to be dominated by Trump, because this is the one thing I think that Kevin and the Republicans should concern themselves with. I don't think there's any reason to believe that if Donald Trump loses this election, that he's going away. In fact, I see him as the person who will gather all the grievances, and because he loves the spotlight, maybe he's going to run again in 2024. I mean, and if that happens, every candidate is frozen in the race. So all I'm trying to say is that the question is, can something other than Trumpism emerge out of the Republican Party?
I think you both make fantastic points about where we are with revenge politics and just our inability to actually have civil conversations and hear other points of view. And so I'm so glad we're having conversations like this. I do want to segue to the Supreme Court issue. And Kevin, you set us up well for this. I think, unfortunately, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death was kind of the October surprise that came in mid-September. We didn't even have a moment to process before both parties were trying to kind of plot political strategy around this. And I think until now, the conventional wisdom was that Republicans were energized by this question and willing to stick with Trump because of the prospect of this nomination. But we've seen in the last few days that Democrats are throwing a ton of money at this issue, donating more than $100 million since Ginsburg's death. I'm interested in how you view the political calculus here. Does this energize Republican voters and give Republicans, as if they needed the green light, but the green light to go ahead and push this through? Or does this energize Democratic voters, all voters? What's the ultimate effect of this sequence of events?
Well, I think it energizes everybody in a different way. I think, many people, of course, are spending a lot of time paying a tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the legacy she had, particularly as it relates to gender and race and a number of the other issues she championed. And so people obviously are conflicted because you're dealing with sort of I think she's going to lie in state in the Capitol on Friday. Yet 2 hours after her passing, we were engulfed in a massive American debate about what to do with her vacancy. Right. And everyone had sort of speculated if something like this happened, particularly with how sort of awful the Kavanaugh nomination process went, and how everyone on both sides left that feeling less congenial towards each other. That it sort of set the stage that if we do another one of these, it's really going to be bad. And I think I'll just say generally, we've gotten to such a period here, and everyone's going to point fingers at each other. And Republicans certainly talk about the Bork, the stopping Robert Bork from getting the confirmation and creating this verb, to borking somebody is a known for stopping them from getting off getting selected. I just think that this has gotten so political, so difficult. There was a time, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg got 97 votes. Many of these justices were confirmed with 90 plus votes, and now you've got almost all of them are in the last couple of years are 50 votes, 52 votes, and I think that unfortunately is the way we've come. And there was a period where the filibuster applied to that; it doesn't now, and so that's also changed the calculus of presidents nominating. So just in general, I say it's a tough deal, and I don't like where we've ended here. I will say politically, it really does crystallize for conservative Republican voters any concerns they might have had with President Trump. I think it puts them back in a position where they feel that this is a more motivated reason to win the election. So I think it does add fuel to the fire. And of course, on the Democrat side, you saw massive amounts of donations coming into Democratic candidates to win those Senate races, right?
Yeah.
So it only just put more kerosene in both parties, probably.
I think there are two things here. One is that, again, I agree with everything that Kevin just said, which, and my view on the Supreme Court nomination is a little different than a lot of my Democratic friends. I don't think that if they're, and the Kavanaugh hearings, are something that basically we've had hearings like this in the past. Nobody ever likes them, really. They come out and basically we have a process which it doesn't make anyone look very good. But I think the real problem, I don't think it's a sin that the Republicans are putting forth a nominee now. The sin was Merrick Garland. The sin was 4 years ago when they did not give Merrick Garland a hearing and an up or down vote. That was what they should have done. And frankly, not having done that, they now have sort of become contortionists in trying to justify what they're doing now. What they're doing now is what almost you would expect to happen in at any time, which is there's this vacancy in the Supreme Court. The president is going to put forth a name, and the Senate is going to act or not act, as the case may be. But in terms of what happened with Merrick Garland in 2016, the Republican majority leader made a calculated decision, a political decision, which was, we're not going to take this up. And the justification he gave for it, which was fairly absurd, was one, but he held all the Republicans. And so now what you have is this. You have people like Lindsey Graham, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who not only in 2016 said, I would do the same if it was a Democratic or if it was a Republican president. In 2018, after the Kavanaugh hearings, where he clearly was very upset by them, said, I wouldn't take up a nomination in an election year. You can hold me to this. He's now leading the charge. So why would anyone believe any politician after people have done, it's one thing to sort of shade things and change the way you're going, to basically sort of say, and the only explanation that I saw that was honest, I thought, was when Senator Barrasso was on Meet the Press, and he said, well, the Democrats would do it if they had the chance, which is sort of like third grade playground stuff. I would like to think you have a better argument than that. I just think the Supreme Court thing, Kevin's probably right about conservatives who may have soured on Trump, and that may bring them home. Same thing with progressive Democrats. I think before the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the level of interest was at an all-time high. I think the turnout is going to be by far the biggest turnout we've ever seen in the history of this country, in spite of COVID. And I think that it could alter a few votes on the margins, which may affect a state here or a state there. I don't know the polling well enough, but I think overall it is what it is, to quote the president. And I think where we are now is just in a situation where very little is going to change anything between now and Election Day.
Well, just one quick follow-up on what you said about Grassley and what came before with Merrick Garland. I'm curious, you as a Democrat, I mean, given the current state of our politics, the revenge politics scenario that we talked about earlier, do you doubt that Democrats would have done the same thing in either of these scenarios if they'd had the chance? Because they haven't had the chance. They don't control the Senate. But if they had the chance.
No, but they did control this. After Bork was defeated, was when they nominated Justice Kennedy, if memory serves me right. And actually in 1968, when Earl Warren announced he was going to retire, Lyndon Johnson tried to make Abe Fortas, who was then a associate justice, the chief justice, and you had a Democratic controlled Senate. And it didn't happen. So all I'm trying to say is that I think the Merrick Garland thing was different and than all the others, much more so than what they're doing now. ironically, and I think that that is the thing that, and by the way, I think the idea of adding justices to the court is a terrible idea. I think that even though it may be my personal philosophy, what I've told several of my Democratic friends this week is, look, they're going to approve this justice, in my opinion, whoever this person is. And by the way, you had people announcing they would vote for whoever Trump nominated, which I found to be stunning, almost as stunning as people who'd say they would vote against whoever he nominated. But I think that what Democrats are going to have to do is they're going to have to elect more people to state legislatures and to Congress, and to pass laws that are carefully worded, and that they can't count on the courts anymore to basically, advance the kind of social obligations of government that they have in the past.
I want to ask one last question, and then I want to leave time for our audience to ask some questions. And so if folks who are tuned in have questions, they can go ahead and start typing them in the YouTube chat box, and I'll get to my last question here, and then we'll see what's on the audience members' minds. But Kevin, before Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, we were talking a lot in this race about suburban women and how key they would be on November 3rd. And that's a group where Trump has lost some ground, really needs to hold on to the suburban women supporters he has. You know really well from Kansas's 3rd congressional district how essential suburban women are. And we think a lot about women voters in Johnson County and how they vote and how pivotal they are. I'm curious how you think that the battle over the Supreme Court will play with suburban women in particular.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the moderate Republican suburban woman is certainly more moderate on social issues usually, and that's what a lot of the Supreme Court positions have come down to. Your position on abortion on both sides. Zero chance that a Republican president would nominate a pro-choice justice, and 0% chance a Democrat president would nominate a pro-life justice. And so, I think as those issues become relevant, I think that would alienate suburban moderate Republican women, independent women. That would probably not help in those suburbs. And I think in the exurbs in rural America, it probably flips the other way. I think one of the interesting things is if you look at the cross section of America, as Trump has lost support for the Republican Party in suburbs, he's gained support in other areas of the country, in rural areas. And so in some ways it's been a wash. And you actually had districts. There was a county in Kentucky, I think there were counties across the country that had voted Democrat in every single election since the founding of the state for 150 years. And even Obama twice and Jimmy Carter. And then some of those counties then voted for Donald Trump by 30 or 40 points. Right. So you can do that, but that's a different message to those voters that somehow switched them. And after 150 years, that's a totally different message than appeals to a Prairie Village moderate Republican woman. And so the political rubber band only stretches so far. And if you're going to go get those voters, then you're going to have some voters that you're going to lose. And that's just where the president has had his biggest challenges with message. Because you just can't have it all. So you're going to have to give up something. And I would say in this case, even within the 3rd district, the more conservative areas of Southern Johnson County and Miami County and Olathe might strengthen the turnout and support for the president. And in the more moderate areas like Prairie Village and Fairway, those areas, it might strengthen support for Joe Biden. I do think in Kansas as a whole, states like Kansas, that the Supreme Court opening greatly increases the likelihood that Roger Marshall is the next United States Senator from Kansas, because Pat Roberts was successful at this. Others have been successful at this, which is when you ask Kansans who they want to be in majority in the Senate, Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell, they're not going to pick Chuck Schumer. And if you can nationalize the race, it becomes much more similar to the presidential vote, and Trump's going to win Kansas by a sizable margin. And this crystallizes for some who might have been thinking about putting their toe in the water and saying that they might vote Democrat for a senator, reminds them of why that would be a really bad thing to do for their positions and ideology on the core value issues that are really important to some of the more rural voters.
Yeah, I think on the court thing, in terms of the impact in suburbia, what's interesting is this: Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, has stated that he's not going to vote for any Supreme Court justice that does not expressly say that they think Roe v. Wade was decided incorrectly. So in terms of abortion being the issue on this, and considering there are not that many Republican votes he can lose, I suspect that whoever the nominee is, that Hawley's going to get that out of them in a way to get him on board. And once he does that, I think it crystallizes the abortion issue a little more. And I would suspect that most of the pro-life community that feels strongly about that was with Trump anyway, and enthusiastically. I think that will have an impact. The other thing is, I think that traditionally, and this is the challenge for Barbara Boullier, who I think is a good candidate, and is that it's very difficult traditionally to run more than 5 points ahead of your presidential nominee. There are exceptions. It's happened. We've all seen it happen from time to time. I mean, Claire McCaslin losing ran a lot closer race than Hillary Clinton did to Donald Trump. But I think that Kansas is a very tough state for a Democrat anyway, particularly on a U.S. Senate race, which, unlike gubernatorial races, are more nationalized.
I don't see any audience questions yet, so I did have a couple other things I wanted to touch on while we have a few minutes left. I wanted to touch on Black Lives Matter protests and also law and order. So earlier this summer, Black Lives Matter protests spread all across the country. We saw them playing out in pretty much every major city. And it seemed like we were kind of reaching a tipping point that could force some changes to policing and other institutions. But ultimately, Congress took no action. Now some of those issues are not as front burner as they were earlier this summer. Allan, I'm curious where you think racial and social justice issues fit into the political landscape in this year's election right now.
Well, I think that they are a motivating factor for Democrats. I think that the response, what I found to be the most heartening of the response to the horrible crimes that were committed by a few police officers was that the protests arose from people of all races and all age groups. And that was really, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement. So, I mean, it had that feel to it of people who just said that they could no longer remain silent. And it was much harder to do in the midst of a pandemic because a lot of people just didn't want to go outside among any groups, masks or no masks. I think that I think it will drive minority turnout and young people's turnout more than certainly in 2016, when the failure of young people and minorities to vote in sufficient numbers made up the difference in the Trump victory. And Trump has done very little, although I know they like to talk about their Black unemployment numbers. The reality is that the latest poll I saw, that 83% of African Americans believe that Trump is a racist. And if that is the belief, where that comes from, I think in so many ways, is to paraphrase something that a friend of mine said at a debate in Florida in 2018. It may not be that the president's a racist, but the racists think he's a racist. And that, I think, is reflected in the reaction of people on the other side of the aisle.
And Kevin, the corollary to that, I'm interested in how you think Republican voters are viewing the protests, as well as kind of the Trump counter programming of "I'm the law and order president." More violence is coming to our cities if you elect Joe Biden. How are Republican voters viewing those two issues at this point?
Sorry, I was muted. I don't think there's a lot of belief in the message that, if you like Joe Biden, that there's going to be, just vandalism all throughout, Overland Park and through the suburbs, and that what was the comment that the president said about, housewives and, some of that language just, it really just doesn't resonate with the folks that I used to represent in the 3rd district, who are, those centerline voters. I do think that on the Republican side, there is a lot of concern about this issue as well. I don't think that, absent maybe some of the positions that the president's taken that has been focused on the media, I think most Republican members of Congress and friends that I have are horrified by the murders of unarmed Black men and people being, these men being shot in the back or obviously suffocated. It's awful, terrific. And I think a lot of people who are Republicans in Kansas are just horrified by it and want something done about that. So I do think there's a lot of bipartisanship for the belief that racism is a problem in America and that we need to come together and recognize it and understand it and do better on trying to change some of the institutional racist problems in the country. I do think probably where Republicans might differ from some of the Democrat, mainline voters is there's also a real concern about the retaliation against law enforcement. And the law enforcement officers being shot on the side of the road. There was a law enforcement officer who I knew who was killed a few months ago this summer at 143rd and Antioch near where I live, who pulled somebody over and he shot him, killed him, didn't go home to his family, didn't go home to his children. I think these men and women, they go out and they put themselves in harm's way. They do it for us. And by the way, I think a lot of folks in urban communities respect and support the need for good law enforcement as much as suburban communities. I don't think that's just a suburban issue because we do need policing and we do need, safety needs to be important. So I think this notion that it's been sort of open season on law enforcement and that that's acceptable given the actions that have occurred, the tragic actions, criminal actions of other law enforcement officer, I think is equally becoming a nightmare problem for the country. And a lot of Republicans would be concerned about that as well. And motivated by that.
Let me just jump in for a couple of things. First of all, I think Kevin's right that the things we saw, whether it was George Floyd or whatever, horrified people, regardless of party. I think describing it as quote open season on law enforcement officers is a little strong. I think that what has happened is horrible. Those police officers who've been assaulted and some killed. But I think that the problem is that and again, one does not justify the other. We have to avoid what we talked about earlier, this revenge notion. The reality is that I think there's a strong belief in the African American community and a belief that has, I think, a lot of evidence to support it, that it's kind of been open season on Black men for a long, long time by certain elements in law enforcement. The problem always is, I shouldn't say no one, most people would agree that you need law enforcement, you need to fund the police, you need to basically do a variety of we need those things in our community. But I think there's a significant movement that sort of said, look, in Kansas City, Missouri, they don't have body cameras on police officers. The only way they're getting them now is there's a private donation. I mean, and the chief of police evidently doesn't think that that's important enough to worry to spend the money from their budget on. We really have to recognize the fact that we have given, well, look at this, we've given police officers enormous amount of power over our lives. There are many things that they can do that none of the rest of us could ever do on a daily basis, which carries with it certain responsibilities. And not shooting unarmed Black men seems to me to be not too much to ask. Most police officers don't do that, but enough do that there is a litany. It is not just a question of one here or two there. And it is something that has gone on for a long time in this country. It's not unique to the South or the North. It is all over the country. And we have to recognize, I think, that systemic racism has infected us all, not in a good way. And it is in the interest of all, regardless of political party or political belief, that whatever we can do to sort of deinstitutionalize what has been sort of part of our life for all of our adult lives is an important thing to do.
Thank you. We do have a question from a viewer, and Kevin, I'll turn to you first on this one. Charlie S. asks, in regards to marginalized individuals voting for Trump as an effort to accomplish something new, how does that connect with where we are in terms of how and what Trump has accomplished to date?
Well, I think many people feel like the president's work to, whether it's on foreign policy, or we talked about disrupting the administration and being a disruptive force. I don't know in terms of being listened to whether that means I want a specific policy, right? I don't know if it's like I don't feel anybody gets me and understands me, and therefore I want this government program. That's how we traditionally think about it. I think what many people in that who are such strong Trump supporters feel like that he gives voice to them on a daily basis, that he amplifies their frustrations and their views in a way that many people aren't able to say because of fear of retribution, or that it's not politically correct, or whatever it may be. And so in that regard, I think they feel like he's done a very good job, because I think Alan would agree, he hasn't changed. He hasn't taken some sort of belief that, okay, I ran as this tough guy who is going to be harsh on people, but now I'm a softie who plays with everybody. He's like, no, I'm still going to be the harsh guy. I'm still going to say things that no president's ever said before. I'm going to say them in ways and do things that are unique. And I think that continues to create that fan base of folks that see him not changing his ways, not becoming part of the establishment that they're so frustrated by.
Yeah,
I would say that's probably how they grade him. It's a little different than we might grade a traditional president, his own voters.
See, I agree with Kevin, because essentially, I think what we have in this country is people always sort of say, well, why would these people vote for someone like Trump when he's not going to really cut their taxes? He's really not going to do very much for them. And I would say for the same reason that Democrats who have money vote for Democrats, even though their taxes are going to be higher. Because what you're talking about here is culturally is why people are attracted oftentimes to one candidate or another, or one party or another. It used to be, by the way, it used to be in this country that if you told me you were a Democrat or Republican, I couldn't tell you where you were on every issue, but now I can. And so I know where you are on virtually every important issue just by knowing what party you support. And it doesn't even have to make sense economically, because it's become sort of a cultural badge that we wear. A friend of ours went into a store in St. Joseph, Missouri the other day. She was wearing her mask, and the guy looked at her, who owns the store. He says, "I'm a Republican, take off your mask."
Wow. We're in a dark place. So, which relates to our next viewer question, in fact. And Alan, I'll come to you first on this. Kate K asks, both of you have mentioned the expanse and strength of the division in current American politics, but have we ever not had that division?
Well, I think the answer to that question is we've always had some division. We've always had acrimony between parties. What we have not had in the past is an inability to sort of put campaigning, if you will, to the side over here and governing over here. They do overlap, but the point is that for a very, very long time, we were able to move the country in a direction which generally was close to the center. You had center right or center left, and the people who were the extremists, they were always existed, but they were on the fringes and they could be marginalized. What's happened now is they have the megaphones, and we've created a situation where if you're a Republican and you're not with Trump, you're going to lose your primary if he wants to go after you almost anywhere. If you're a Democrat and you happen to be a pro-life Democrat, you're going to lose your primary almost anywhere that you run. And that's a terrible situation that we have here. It wasn't always like this. There were times when I worked in Washington in the 70s, which is even longer ago than when Kevin was elected and it was up there. Democrats and Republicans would sit around and they'd scream and yell at each other, and they'd go out to dinner together. These were elected members who had significant disagreements, but they also, when I worked in Washington in the 70s, and Tip O'Neill was the speaker, and he wanted to pass something, he would call the minority leader, Bob Michael, and he would say, "Look, I need 30 votes for this bill. What do you need in the bill? What do your guys need to get me 30 votes?" And then what they would do is they would work something out. And those days are gone. And so we're now passing things with only Democrats if they're in control, or only Republicans if they're in control. And that's a terrible place to be.
Kevin, was it different when you were in Washington?
No, it was about the same. You know, I think a lot of this, to the questioner's point, which is, I just elaborate on their question, which is like, has this always been this way? Maybe we've not noticed it or not been as aware of it before. Is this somehow different period that we're in? And I would say, look, we've always been a country that, because of our, birth of, democracy in the world, has been, we're the oldest democracy, and we're a country that is founded upon, political argument and political compromise and division. It's just how we were created, and we sort of pioneered a lot of that. So it's at the core of who we are as Americans. I think what's really has changed how we discourse, and that's affected our government, is 24-hour news cycle, cable news, echo rooms, combined with social media. So it used to be, if you had an opinion, you could just you could argue with your neighbor, your coworker, your church parishioner, your classmate. Now you can get on and argue with people all around the world, and some of people aren't even real people. Like, you can get around and argue with robots around the world about about political viewpoints, and people do it and work themselves up into a frenzy and get into these massive battles, and then they go watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or one of their preferred digestion of news sites, and they just spoon feed in what already confirms what they already know. And so what Allan's tried to do at American Public Square, and I think what the Dole Center tries to do and others, is to try to really get back to the dialogue, that town square dialogue, where people personally and you can respect their viewpoints. And I've heard it called that. I've heard some others say that it's the lack of respect or the contempt for others that is driving politics. It's no longer, and Emmanuel Cleaver and I used to talk about this, is that, he and I did a lot of stuff together to try to exemplify that a Republican and a Democrat can get along. We did Allan's first event actually years ago, and to try to show that two people from two political parties can respect each other's viewpoints. And if you can't respect each other's viewpoints, then we're never going to get anywhere. And so I think each one of us, the three of us and everyone who's watching this program, has to think, do they truly respect someone's viewpoint opposite of them on abortion or on gun control or on Donald Trump? And if you don't think that viewpoint has any validity or merit to come forward, then you're really not going to have a discourse. And so, to Allan's point, we become very divided. I think then media pushes that, and social media pushes that. And I appreciate Allan saying that both parties do it. And I was in office. If I voted for something that Barack Obama signed into law, that meant that I had sold out once he signed it. Now, if he wasn't for it, it was okay. But once he signed it, so by very definition, while Barack Obama was president, I could not be a good enough Republican because I clearly had cut a deal with him because he signed the bill. Did he veto it or did he sign it? If he vetoed it, it's okay. So that is, how could you ever govern? And so I remember, even when, we got calls every single day in the office for the 6 years I served when Barack Obama was president, saying, you're not a strong enough Republican, you need to impeach Barack Obama, for whatever reason. And then literally the day after Trump got elected, I got calls every day saying, you're not a moderate, you're not looking out for all of us because you won't impeach Donald Trump, right? And so everyone's got this belief. What used to be on the when you do polling, you could do favorable, unfave. We got to the point with presidents, we would just do favorable, impeach, because the unfave and the impeach were about the same thing with both presidents. Democrats ultimately ended up doing it, but I think the challenge is the same in both parties. And I remember when Chuck Schumer, when he at one point was trying to cut some deals with Donald Trump early on, they would protest outside of his house. Democrats would, and they'd say, resist or resign.
No,
right? It's the whole nation of resist. Means it doesn't mean cooperate, it doesn't mean work together, it doesn't mean solve, be pragmatic or perish. I've never seen that sign, right?
Yeah.
Like compromise or scram. I've never seen those signs. It's resist or resign, right? And I can promise you, going back to this revenge politics notion, that if Trump gets reelected, that will continue on. Any Democrat that works with Donald Trump will be cast out in their party. And if Trump loses, then Republicans will turn and say, if you work with Joe Biden, then you're an apostate. And this continues on. And I don't know when that ends, but I think it's fostered and it becomes more pronounced because of 24-hour news cycle and social media. I feel like that expands it. Just to put it in perspective, Dennis Moore, my predecessor, did not even have a Facebook or Twitter account. Right. So think how much we've changed in the last 10 years. They would get printed letters. Right. It's just a different environment.
Yeah, and really, I think that one of the reasons, frankly, that we do American Public Square, and certainly why the Dole Institute exists, well, one of the things we can try to do, and Kevin, you may not think, you may think that there's so much noise out there we can never cut through it, but it seems to me that we need to sort of let elected officials and appointed officials basically support them in terms of them looking at things as much more nuanced. It's not just, are you with me or are you against me? And that one of the things that these public dialogues hopefully do is inform more people to the fact that it's not quite that simple. It's not just, did Barack Obama sign it? Did Donald Trump sign it? It is like, oh, there are all these different parts to it. And maybe we can only do it at a local level. And I'm willing to start there. But it just seems to me that somewhere along the line, we've got a large number of Americans who really would kind of like the sort of the noise to go away and to move things forward. And when you look at what Congress has passed in the last 6 years, aside from continuing appropriations bill, continuing resolutions to keep the government funded, there's not a whole lot. And what happens is that it's because it's become sort of dysfunctional. And I think that something's got to go somewhere along the line. And hopefully we can get some kind of a rejuvenation after this election among people who've decided that the last 4 years are not worth living through the next 4 years, regardless of who's president.
I do want to get to one final viewer question, and then our time's going to expire, unfortunately. But I think this is an interesting question. And Kevin, you touched earlier on the reliability of polls and not overinterpreting national polls in particular. So Bella K asks, if the president gets reelected, despite what the polls are suggesting, what do you think that means for the future of polling and how campaigns are run?
Well, that's a really fascinating question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that, and I'm certainly not a polling expert. Maybe Alan can speak to it a little bit, but I think it does get harder to poll people, right? It gets harder and harder. It used to be landlines, and they've got to, to get the samples they need. I think it's become more and more difficult. But yeah, if the nationals polls said that Trump was, if the average of all the polls said Trump was losing by 8 points and he actually won the national vote, then polling may be dead forever in politics. I think one of the things I hear a lot in this whole thing about polling is that, well, Trump's down the polling, he was down last time and he still won, so polling's not accurate. I hear that a lot on the Republican side. Well, the reality is Trump was down 3 or 4 points in national polls and he lost the national vote by what, 2.5%, 3%. I mean, it was within a point or two of the polling, within the margin of error. It was the state by state. And so states are smaller samples, do really careful how you read polling. But I think if the entire, so I don't really know that the result of 2016 is what we think of it when it comes to polling, because the polling nationally was pretty close. It was the state by state, and there were some polls that were widely off, and there wasn't a lot of polling in Wisconsin and Michigan. People just weren't polling it that much. It wasn't on the radar, right? And so a couple outlier polls can really drive a narrative and maybe inaccurate. So you do have to kind of watch the average of all the polls, I think, on this stuff, and I think that's important. I did want to say, Alan earlier did mention that sort of how cynical it's become that campaigns may not even go for the popular vote. I did see, I think it might have been Nate Silver, one of the analysts recently went through sort of how much Biden needs to win by on the national popular vote in order to have an assurance of victory. And I think his analysis was he's got to get 5% or more on the popular vote to have an 80% chance of winning. And that if Biden were to win by 1 or 2 points, it's like a 4% chance of winning. And I would say I think it's less about the cynical nature of it and more just about how the populations have shifted in the country, and how the campaigns essentially are going to gravitate to where these electoral votes matter. And what you have is in blue cities, Joe Biden may win 80-20, right? So you run up the score in the cities, but then it doesn't spread out across the country. And so I know there's been a lot of criticism of both the Electoral College on the left, even the Senate's under criticism now, that it ought to be reconstituted in some fashion. And so we'll see if those arguments take hold. I mean, the Constitution was certainly always meant to be reconsidered and has means to be amended by the public. But those are pretty fundamental, foundational principles of the country. And they're put in there for a reason. I think we have some pretty long, good debates before we make those changes.
Yeah, I agree that there are going to be very few changes that require constitutional amendments. I predict that the polling that we're seeing all within the margin of error come November. I think that a lot of adjustments have been made that needed to be made in terms of how they constructed their sample. I think the biggest problem for them is going to be figuring out all the mail-in ballots and trying to sort of the bottom line will be calling different states election night. The question is have they built into their model that, okay, there's 2 million ballots out, 1.2 million are Republicans, 800,000 are Democrats, or does that never come into it? So we'll see.
And with that, you get the final word there. And we're just about out of time. So I really want to thank you both. This has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you, Ambassador Allan Katz and Congressman Kevin Yoder, for both a civil and constructive exchange of ideas and for sharing your wisdom. I think this was a really great kickoff to our discussion series. I want to remind everyone that we'll be back next Wednesday at 4 p.m. to try to answer the question, why did so many people underestimate Joe Biden? Even though he entered the 2020 Democratic presidential primary as the front runner, a lot of political pundits lost confidence in him along the way, wrote his political obituary, and declared him an also-ran who'd missed his moment. And so next week, we'll be looking at how a lot of pundits got it wrong and how Biden arrived at this moment. Thanks for joining us today. Please come back next week. And if your Wednesday afternoons are already booked, you can find all of these discussions archived at the Dole Institute's YouTube channel. And I hope to see you soon for more politics, pandemic, and protests from the Dole Institute at KU.